Upon meeting the new waitress at the luxury restaurant, the millionaire froze, recognizing his great love from his youth. She disappeared 18 years ago. Benjamin Carter sat at the corner table of Carter's Grill, the flagship restaurant of his luxury dining empire. The ambient lighting reflected off the polished cutlery and the crystal glasses, casting a warm glow over the room. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Benjamin swirled the wine in his glass absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting as they often did in these quiet moments. It had been 18 years since she vanished. Jessica, the name still carried a weight in his heart, an ache that even his immense fortune couldn't soothe. She had been the love of his life, and her sudden disappearance had left a wound that never truly healed. Lost in thought, Benjamin barely noticed when a new waitress approached his table. "Good evening, sir. Are you ready to order?" The voice jolted him out of his reverie. Polite, soft, and vaguely familiar, he looked up, and the air left his lungs. Standing before him was Jessica, or at least someone who looked exactly like her. The same piercing eyes, though slightly more tired. The same smile, though tinged with an unfamiliar sense of weariness. Benjamin blinked. Sure, he was imagining things. His mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. It couldn't be her. Jessica had been gone for nearly 2 decades without a trace. And yet, there she was, holding a notepad, dressed in the sleek black uniform of his staff. "Sir?" she prompted, her brow furrowing slightly at his silence. I'll just have the chef's special," Benjamin stammered, his usually composed demeanor completely shattered. "Of course," she replied, giving a professional smile before walking away. Benjamin's eyes followed her as she moved gracefully between tables, exchanging polite words with other diners. It was her, he was certain. But how? And why here? Of all places, the rest of the evening passed in a blur. Benjamin couldn't focus on his food or the murmured conversations around him. He was consumed by questions. When the meal ended, he lingered at the table, watching her discreetly. She didn't seem to recognize him. As she passed by, Benjamin stopped her. "Excuse me, what's your name?" he asked, his voice laced with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Lauren," she answered without hesitation. "Is there anything else I can assist you with, sir?" Lauren. The name felt wrong, like a lie, but her face, there was no mistaking it. "No, thank you," he said quietly, releasing her from the conversation. After she left, Benjamin sat in silence, grappling with the storm of emotions brewing inside him. He needed answers, but he couldn't risk scaring her off. He decided to leave without further confrontation. But as he walked out into the cool New York night, one thing was certain: he would be back. The next morning, Benjamin sat in his office, the city skyline stretching out behind him. He couldn't shake the image of her. Jessica, or Lauren, or whoever she was. He had spent years searching for Jessica, hiring investigators, following every lead, only to end up with dead ends. And now, after all this time, she had reappeared in his life like a ghost from the past. "David," Benjamin called, summoning his personal assistant. "Yes, Mr. Carter. I need you to discreetly look into someone," Benjamin said, his voice firm. "A waitress at Carter's Grill named Lauren. Find out everything you can about her. Where she's from, her background, everything." David nodded without question. "Right away, sir." As the day passed, Benjamin's anticipation grew. He couldn't help but wonder about the life Lauren had lived, the choices she had made, and why she was working in his restaurant of all places. When evening came, Benjamin returned to Carter's Grill, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He sat at the same table, waiting for her to appear. When she finally did, carrying a tray of drinks for another table, he felt his breath catch again. This time, he observed her more closely. She moved with a calm efficiency, chatting briefly with customers. There was no sign of recognition in her eyes when their gazes met. It was as if she truly didn't know who he was. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," the restaurant manager greeted him, breaking his train of thought. "Is everything to your satisfaction tonight?" "Yes," Benjamin replied absent-mindedly. "I wanted to ask about one of your staff members, Lauren. How long has she been working here?" "Lauren?" The manager looked surprised by the question. "She's been with us for a few months now. She's reliable and hardworking, though she keeps to herself." Why do you ask? No reason, Benjamin said, masking his true intentions. As the night wore on, Benjamin's resolve solidified. He didn't know how, but he would uncover the truth, whether she was Jessica or someone else entirely. He couldn't let this chance slip away. Walking out of the restaurant, he glanced back one last time. Lauren was wiping down a table, her movements methodical and unhurried. For a moment, she looked up, her eyes meeting his, a flicker of something, recognition, curiosity, or maybe just coincidence, passed across her face before she returned to her work. Benjamin stepped into the night, his mind racing. This was only the beginning. The following day, Benjamin Carter found himself consumed by thoughts of Lauren, sitting in his opulent penthouse office. The morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he absent-mindedly tapped his pen against the polished mahogany desk. His assistant, David, had been working on the task Benjamin assigned, and every second of waiting felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened, and David stepped in with a file folder in hand. "I've gathered some initial information on Lauren, sir," he said, placing the folder on Benjamin's desk. Benjamin reached for it without hesitation, his heart racing as he flipped through the pages. Inside were basic details: her full name, Lauren Jacobs, her date of birth, and her current address in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. "She's been in New York for about 5 years, David continued. "But her records before that are sparse. It looks like she moved around a lot, mostly in small towns. There's nothing particularly unusual, but I'll dig deeper if you need." Benjamin nodded, his eyes scanning the documents. Nothing here explained how Jessica, the woman he had loved and lost, could have transformed into Lauren, a waitress with no apparent connection to her past. "Keep looking," he said firmly. "I want to know everything, and don't let her suspect anything." "Yes, sir," David replied before leaving the room. As the day wore on, Benjamin couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of uncovering something monumental. That evening, he returned to Carter's Grill, determined to approach Lauren more directly. The restaurant was bustling, its warm glow and lively chatter creating a welcoming atmosphere. Benjamin was seated at his usual table, but this time, he didn't have to wait long for Lauren to notice him. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said with a polite smile, setting down a glass of water in front of him. "Back again so soon?" Benjamin chuckled softly, masking the intensity of his emotions. "What can I say? I like to keep an eye on things." Lauren laughed lightly. "Well, I hope everything is to your satisfaction. Can I get you anything to start?" "Just a coffee for now," he replied as she walked away. Benjamin's gaze followed her. There was something so familiar in the way she moved, the way she carried herself. He couldn't ignore it. When she returned with his coffee, Benjamin decided to take a chance. "Lauren," he began, his tone casual. "Have you always lived in New York?" She paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Not always. I moved here a few years ago." "Where were you before that?" "Boston, mostly," she said, her expression guarded. "I moved around a bit before settling there." Benjamin nodded, trying to keep his composure. Boston. It was a small detail, but it matched the story of Jessica's disappearance. "Do you have family there?" he pressed gently. Lauren hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "Not really. I was taken in by a kind family after some difficult times. They were good to me." The admission hit Benjamin like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his coffee to mask the surge of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "That must have been hard," he said softly. Lauren shrugged, her smile faint but genuine. "It was, but life has a way of moving forward, doesn't it?" Benjamin nodded, though his mind was racing. He couldn't push her too hard. Not yet. If she truly didn't remember who she was, or who he was, he would have to tread carefully. As the evening wore on, Benjamin stayed longer than usual, observing Lauren as she worked, her interactions with other customers, her calm demeanor, the way she carried herself. It was all so familiar, yet there was an undeniable distance between the woman she was now and the Jessica he remembered. When he finally left the restaurant, Benjamin felt both hopeful and frustrated. He had more pieces of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. The next morning, David delivered more updates. "I've found something interesting, sir," he said, handing over another folder. "It appears Lauren was involved in an accident about 18 years ago. There aren't many details, but it happened near Boston. She was hospitalized for head trauma and released into the care of a local family. After that, her records are sparse until she resurfaced in New York." Benjamin's hands trembled slightly as he read the report. Head trauma. It explained so much. The memory loss, the new identity. It all fit, but it also raised more questions. Who was responsible for her disappearance? And why? "Good work, David," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Keep digging. I need to know everything about that accident and the circumstances around it." As David left, Benjamin leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline outside his window. He was closer to the truth than ever, but the road ahead was far from clear. That evening, Benjamin returned to Carter's Grill once more. This time, he wasn't just a curious observer. He was a man on a mission, determined to piece together the fragments of a love story interrupted by tragedy. As he entered the restaurant, his eyes found Lauren immediately. She was laughing softly with a coworker, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the chandelier overhead. For a moment, Benjamin felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lauren Jacobs sat on the worn couch in her modest apartment, staring at the flickering screen of an old television. The sitcom playing in the background failed to hold her attention, her mind wandering to the strange encounters she'd had with Benjamin Carter over the past few days. There was something about him that unsettled her. Not in a bad way, but in a way she couldn't quite articulate. His questions about her past had stirred something deep within her, like faint echoes of a song she'd forgotten how to sing. Lauren closed her eyes, letting out a deep sigh. For as long as she could remember, her life had been a series of restarts. She had no memory of anything before the accident. The kind family in Boston that had taken her in always avoided talking about the specifics, simply telling her she had been found hurt and alone. She had learned to stop asking questions, accepting the gaps in her memory as a part of who she was. But now, those gaps felt more like holes, voids that Benjamin's presence seemed to illuminate. The next day, Lauren arrived at Carter's Grill for her evening shift, trying to push her thoughts aside. The restaurant was bustling as usual, and she welcomed the distraction. But as the evening progressed, her unease grew. It started with small things. The way Benjamin's cologne lingered faintly in the air reminded her of something she couldn't place. A customer's laugh sounded eerily familiar, triggering a sense of déjà vu so strong it made her pause mid-step. Then, as she cleared a table near the back, her hand brushed against the leather-bound menu, and an image flashed through her mind. A fleeting vision of candlelight, a man's hand reaching across the table to hold hers. Her breath caught, and she gripped the edge of the table for support. "Lauren, are you okay?" a coworker asked, concern etched on her face. Lauren forced a smile, brushing off the moment. "Yeah, just a little tired." But inside, her heart was racing. The vision had felt so real, yet it made no sense. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it as a figment of her imagination. But the rest of the evening passed in a blur, her thoughts consumed by the strange flashes. Meanwhile, Benjamin sat at his usual table, observing her carefully. He noticed her hesitation, the slight tremor in her movements, and the faraway look in her eyes. He could sense that something was stirring within her, and it both terrified and exhilarated him. When Lauren approached his table to refill his water, he decided to test the waters. "Long day?" he asked, his tone casual. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's been strange, I guess." Benjamin leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Strange how?" she shrugged, avoiding his eyes. "I don't know. Sometimes I get these, I don't know what to call them. Flashes like memories, but they don't feel like mine." His heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to remain composed. "What kind of memories?" Lauren hesitated, as if debating whether to share more. "Just little things. A smell, a sound, like fragments of something I can't quite grasp." She gave a nervous laugh. "Sorry, that probably sounds crazy." "Not at all," Benjamin said softly, his voice laced with empathy. "Sometimes the mind holds on to things, even when we don't realize it." Lauren studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Maybe, she said finally, before walking away to tend to another table. Benjamin watched her go, his mind racing. It was clear that her memories were starting to surface, but he knew he couldn't rush the process. If he pushed too hard, he might scare her away. Later that night, as Lauren walked home, the flashes continued. A soft melody hummed in the back of her mind, a tune she couldn't quite place but felt achingly familiar. She found herself humming it under her breath, the sound echoing off the empty streets. When she reached her apartment, she sat down at the small kitchen table, pulling out a notebook she rarely used. Flipping to a blank page, she began to write down everything she could remember about the flashes, the candlelight, the melody, the faint scent of cologne. As the words filled the page, she felt a strange mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that she was finally confronting these fragments, and frustration that they refused to form a complete picture. In his penthouse, Benjamin stared out at the city lights, his thoughts consumed by Lauren. He had spent the evening reviewing the details David had uncovered about her accident and the family who had taken her in. The more he learned, the more certain he became that she was Jessica. But the question remained: how could he help her remember without causing her more pain? The answers, he knew, wouldn't come easily, but Benjamin was nothing if not determined. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Lauren lay awake in her bed, the notebook resting on the nightstand beside her. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, but the fragments continued to swirl in her mind, like pieces of a puzzle scattered by the wind, and somewhere deep within her, a door that had long been locked began to creak open. Benjamin paced the length of his office, the sharp click of his shoes against the hardwood floor echoing in the spacious room. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, centered on one person, Gregory. The revelations from David's investigation had left him with more questions than answers. Gregory had been his best friend, someone he had trusted implicitly for decades. But the more Benjamin pieced together the timeline of Jessica's disappearance, the more Gregory's behavior during that period stood out as suspicious. His constant presence, his overly eager support. It now seemed more like an act of guilt than genuine concern. Benjamin didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was mounting. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Gregory, it's Benjamin," he said when the line connected. "We need to talk tonight." "Sure," Gregory replied, his tone casual. "What's this about?" "I'd rather discuss it in person," Benjamin said curtly. Gregory hesitated, but then agreed to meet at Benjamin's penthouse later that evening. When Gregory arrived, he greeted Benjamin with his usual jovial demeanor, but Benjamin wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. He motioned for Gregory to sit, his expression serious. "What's going on, Ben?" Gregory asked, his tone laced with unease. Benjamin wasted no time. "I've been looking into Jessica's disappearance." Gregory's face faltered for a fraction of a second before he composed himself. "Jessica, after all these years, I thought you'd moved on from that." "I never moved on," Benjamin said, his voice sharp. "And now I think I'm finally getting close to the truth." Gregory leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "What truth?" "It was a tragedy, Ben. She disappeared. No one knows what happened. That's the thing." "Gregory," Benjamin said, his eyes narrowing. "I think you do." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Gregory's expression shifted, the mask of calm slipping as tension filled the room. "What the hell are you talking about?" Gregory demanded, his voice defensive. Benjamin leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. "You were the last person to see her that night. You told me she never showed up for our dinner. But now I'm starting to think that wasn't true. And then there's the accident. An accident that conveniently happened just hours after she disappeared." Gregory's face turned pale. "Ben, you're chasing ghosts. You can't seriously think I had anything to do with this." "I didn't want to," Benjamin admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But the pieces are falling into place, and they all point to you. So, I'll ask you one more time. What happened to Jessica that night?" For a moment, Gregory said nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then, finally, Gregory sighed and looked away. "You don't understand," he began, his voice low. "You had everything, Ben. The perfect life, the perfect career, and Jessica. She was everything I ever wanted but could never have. Watching you two together, it was unbearable." Benjamin's hands clenched into fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. "So, what did you do?" "I didn't mean for it to go so far," Gregory said quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I just wanted her to leave, to give me a chance to show you that I could be just as important as she was to you. I hired someone to scare her, to convince her to leave town, but she panicked and things spiraled out of control." Benjamin stared at Gregory, his disbelief turning into fury. "You're telling me you orchestrated the disappearance of the woman I loved? You destroyed my life because of your pathetic jealousy?" Gregory flinched at the venom in Benjamin's voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She escaped Ben, she ran, and in the chaos, she must have had the accident. I didn't know what to do, so I kept quiet. You thought you could just let me believe she was gone forever," Benjamin interrupted, his voice shaking with rage. "You let me grieve for her, all while pretending to be my friend." "I'm sorry," Gregory said, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you like this." Benjamin stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get to apologize. Not after what you've done." Gregory stood as well, his desperation palpable. "Ben, please, I didn't know she survived the accident. If I had, I would have told you." "Stop lying," Benjamin snapped. "I don't want your excuses. I don't want anything from you." Gregory's shoulders slumped in defeat. "What are you going to do?" Benjamin's eyes burned with a mix of anger and determination. "I'm going to find her. I'm going to make this right, no matter what it takes. And you're done. I don't ever want to see you again." Gregory opened his mouth to protest, but then thought better of it. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the penthouse, leaving Benjamin alone with his thoughts. As the door clicked shut, Benjamin felt the weight of Gregory's betrayal settle over him. But beneath the anger and heartbreak, there was a spark of hope. Jessica, Lauren, was alive, and he was closer than ever to bringing her back into his life. He poured himself a glass of scotch, staring out at the city lights. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of looking back. Benjamin stared at the scotch in his hand, the amber liquid swirling as his thoughts churned. Gregory's confession had shattered something deep within him. The betrayal was worse than he'd imagined. But there was no time to dwell on the past. He had to focus on Jessica, on Lauren, and on finding a way to reconnect with her, to bring the truth to light without causing her further pain. The next morning, Benjamin contacted David. "I need you to focus all your resources on finding out more about Lauren's accident. Dig into hospital records, police reports, anything that might tell us who helped her after she escaped Gregory's plan." David nodded. "I'll get started immediately. I'll also follow up with that family in Boston who took her in. They might have more details." Benjamin spent the day restless, pacing his office, unable to concentrate on the mountain of paperwork that awaited him. His mind was consumed by questions. How much did Lauren remember? Could she handle the truth about her past? And most importantly, would she ever forgive him for the pain she had endured because of his misplaced trust in Gregory? That evening, Benjamin returned to Carter's Grill. He wasn't sure why he kept going back, but something about being near Lauren gave him hope. Even if she didn't recognize him yet, she greeted him with the same polite smile she offered every customer. "Good evening, Mr. Carter, your usual table." "Yes, please," he replied, his voice calm despite the turmoil inside him as she led him to his table. Benjamin couldn't help but notice the slight tension in her movements. She seemed distracted, her usual composure shaken. Once seated, he decided to test the waters again. "You seem preoccupied tonight," he said gently. Lauren hesitated, then shrugged. "Just tired, I guess. It's been a long week." Benjamin nodded, his gaze steady. "I can imagine. It's not easy working here, I'm sure." "It's not bad," she replied, avoiding his eyes. "I like keeping busy." There was a pause, and Benjamin seized the opportunity. "Lauren, do you ever think about your life before Boston, before you moved here?" Her hand froze briefly as she adjusted the cutlery on the table. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But there's not much to think about. I don't really remember anything before the accident." Benjamin leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle but probing. "Do you ever wonder why you can't remember?" Lauren frowned, her fingers tightening around the edge of the tray she held. "I try not to dwell on it. What's the point?" The past is the past. But what if it isn't? Benjamin pressed, his voice tinged with urgency. What if your past holds answers to questions you didn't even know you had? Lauren looked at him, her expression guarded. Why are you asking me this? Benjamin hesitated, knowing he was treading on thin ice. Because sometimes, letting go of the past isn't the answer. Sometimes, it's the key to understanding who we are. Before she could respond, another customer called for her attention, and she quickly excused herself. Benjamin watched her go, frustration and determination warring within him. He couldn't keep dancing around the truth, but he also couldn't risk pushing her too far too fast. The following day, David arrived at Benjamin's office with a new report. I think I've found something, he said, placing a folder on the desk. Benjamin opened it eagerly. Inside were hospital records from 18 years ago. The details were sparse, but they confirmed what he already suspected. Lauren had been admitted with head trauma and memory loss after a car accident. There were also records of a local couple, the Jacobs family, who had taken her in and cared for her during her recovery. They were the ones who gave her the name Lauren, David explained. Her real identity was never established, so they treated her as their own and helped her start a new life. Benjamin's eyes lingered on the name Jacobs. It felt wrong, like a placeholder for something much more significant. Did you find anything about the accident itself? What caused it? David hesitated. There's no police report on file, which is strange. It's like the incident was never officially recorded. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Gregory must have covered it up. Possibly, David agreed. But there's something else. The family in Boston mentioned that Lauren had recurring nightmares when she first came to live with them. They said she would wake up screaming about someone chasing her. The words sent a chill down Benjamin's spine. Jessica, or Lauren, had been running for her life, terrified and alone, while he had been oblivious to the truth. I need to speak to that family, Benjamin said, his voice firm. Arrange it. David nodded and left the room, leaving Benjamin to wrestle with the weight of what he had learned. That evening, Benjamin sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city lights. He thought about the countless nights he had spent grieving Jessica, blaming himself for not being able to protect her. And now, the truth was within reach. But it came with a new burden, the responsibility to help Lauren reclaim her identity without shattering the life she had built for herself at Carter's Grill. Lauren closed her shift, her mind heavy with questions she couldn't ignore. Benjamin's words from the night before echoed in her ears. What if your past holds answers? As she walked home, the fragments of memory that had been surfacing became harder to suppress. The candlelight, the melody, the sensation of someone's hand reaching for hers. By the time she reached her apartment, she felt overwhelmed, like a dam was about to break. She sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the notebook where she had been recording her flashes of memory. Picking up a pen, she wrote a single question at the top of the page, "Who am I?" For the first time in years. She allowed herself to truly wonder. The next day, Lauren arrived at Carter's Grill feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and unease. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the fragments of memory that had been resurfacing with increasing intensity. Benjamin Carter's words lingered in her mind. And though she didn't fully understand why, she felt drawn to him in a way that unsettled her. She pushed those feelings aside as she tied her apron and stepped into the bustling restaurant. The familiar rhythm of work offered a welcome distraction, but as the evening progressed, she found herself glancing toward the entrance every few minutes. When Benjamin finally walked through the door, her chest tightened. She tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence that he kept returning, but deep down, she knew better. There was something deliberate about his presence, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," Lauren said as she approached his table. "Your usual." Benjamin smiled, the warmth in his expression softening the tension in her shoulders. "Yes, please. And perhaps you could join me for a moment. I'd love to hear about your week." Lauren hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. "I'm not sure that's allowed. I'll take full responsibility," Benjamin said, his tone light but persuasive. Reluctantly, Lauren slid into the seat across from him, her hands folded nervously in her lap. "So," she said, trying to mask her discomfort, "what's so important that you needed to hear about my week?" Benjamin chuckled softly. "Nothing in particular, I just thought you might enjoy a break." Lauren studied him, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're very curious about me. Is that so unusual?" Benjamin asked, tilting his head. "You're an intriguing person, Lauren." She gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "I don't know about that. I'm pretty ordinary." "I disagree," Benjamin said, his voice gentle but firm. "There's something remarkable about you. I can see it, even if you don't." Lauren's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, unsure how to respond. There was something about Benjamin that made her feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. It was both comforting and unnerving. "I should get back to work," she said finally, rising from her seat. "Of course," Benjamin said, his smile never wavering. "But before you go, what's your favorite dish here?" Lauren blinked, caught off guard by the question. I guess the mushroom risotto. It's simple, but it's comforting." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "I'll have to try it sometime." "Thank you, Lauren." As she walked away, Lauren felt her heart racing. There was something disarming about Benjamin's kindness, and it left her feeling more unsettled than ever. Later that evening, as Lauren wiped down tables after the last customers had left, Benjamin lingered at his own table. Watching her with quiet determination, he could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she seemed torn between curiosity and caution. It mirrored his own internal struggle. Finally, as she passed by his table, Benjamin spoke again. "Lauren, can I ask you something?" She paused, looking at him warily. "What is it? Have you ever thought about where you see yourself in 5 years?" he asked, his tone casual. Lauren frowned, clearly surprised by the question. "I don't know. I've never really planned that far ahead." Benjamin nodded, as if expecting her answer. "Maybe it's time you did. You have so much potential. I'd hate to see you limit yourself." Lauren tilted her head. Her curiosity piqued despite herself. "Why do you care?" Benjamin hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I see something in you. Something worth nurturing." Lauren didn't respond right away, her mind racing. She wanted to dismiss his words as flattery, but there was a sincerity in his voice that made it hard to ignore. "I appreciate that," she said finally, though her tone was guarded. As Lauren left for the night, Benjamin felt a flicker of hope. He knew he was treading carefully, but every small connection he made with her felt like a step closer to the truth. Back at her apartment, Lauren sat at her kitchen table, staring at the notebook where she had been recording her fragmented memories. Tonight, she added something new: mushroom risotto, candlelight, a voice saying, "You're remarkable." She didn't know why those details felt important, but they stirred something deep within her, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble. Meanwhile, Benjamin sat in his penthouse, poring over the latest updates from David. The Jacobs family had agreed to meet with him, and they had hinted at additional details about Lauren's past that hadn't been in the records. As he closed the file, Benjamin felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he was determined to navigate it with care. Lauren's trust was fragile, and he couldn't afford to lose it. The next day, Benjamin made his way to Boston to meet the Jacobs family. The modest house where Lauren had spent the first years after her accident was a stark contrast to his world of luxury, but it felt fitting. This was where she had rebuilt her life, where she had found stability after the chaos Gregory had caused. Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs greeted him warmly, their kindness evident in the way they spoke about Lauren. "She was a blessing to us," Mrs. Jacobs said, her eyes shining with emotion. She didn't remember much about where she came from, but she had such a strong spirit. We knew she'd been through something terrible, but she never let it define her. As they shared more stories about Lauren's early years with them, Benjamin felt a deep gratitude toward these strangers who had cared for her when he couldn't. But the more he learned, the more determined he became to uncover the full truth, and to ensure that Lauren finally had the answers she deserved. Benjamin sat in the Jacobs' modest living room, a steaming cup of tea untouched in his hands. The warm, homey atmosphere of the house was a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of his penthouse in New York. He listened intently as Mrs. Jacobs recounted the first days after Lauren, Jessica, had come into their lives. "She was terrified when we found her," Mrs. Jacobs said, her voice tinged with sadness. "She couldn't remember her name, where she came from, or how she ended up in that hospital. The nightmares were the worst. She'd wake up screaming, convinced someone was chasing her. Benjamin's chest tightened at her words. The thought of Jessica, his Jessica, living in fear, lost and alone, was almost too much to bear. She told us she didn't want to remember, Mr. Jacobs added, his expression thoughtful. She said whatever was behind her was better left there. So, we didn't press her. We gave her a fresh start. Benjamin nodded, understanding their decision even as it pained him. You gave her a life when she had nothing. I'll always be grateful for that. Mrs. Jacobs smiled kindly. We just wanted her to be happy. She deserved that. Before leaving, Benjamin asked if they had kept anything from Lauren's past, anything that might help piece together the puzzle. Mrs. Jacobs hesitated before retrieving a small battered box from a closet. She didn't want these, she said, handing it to Benjamin. But we couldn't bring ourselves to throw them away. Maybe they'll mean something to you. Inside the box were a few scraps of paper, a broken bracelet, and a faded photograph. Benjamin's heart stopped when he saw it. The photo was of him and Jessica, laughing together in front of a fountain. It was taken on the day he had planned to propose. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This means more to me than I can say. Back in New York that evening, Benjamin couldn't stop staring at the photograph. The sight of their younger selves, so happy and full of hope, was a painful reminder of everything they had lost, but it also strengthened his resolve. The next day, Benjamin returned to Carter's grill with the photo tucked safely in his pocket. He watched Lauren as she worked, noticing the small lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She seemed weighed down, as if the memories she was starting to uncover were taking a toll on her when she approached his table. He decided to take a chance. Lauren, he began, his tone gentle, do you ever feel like there's something missing? Like you're searching for something, even if you don't know what it is? Lauren hesitated, her hand tightening around the edge of the tray. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice quiet. But I've learned not to dwell on it. It's easier that way. Benjamin nodded, his heart aching for her. I understand, but sometimes the things we try to forget have a way of finding us anyway. Lauren's gaze flickered to his, something unspoken passing between them. Before she could respond, another customer called for her attention, and she quickly excused herself. As the evening went on, Benjamin stayed longer than usual, hoping for another moment to connect with her. Finally, as she finished clearing the last table, he approached her cautiously. Lauren, can I show you something? He asked. Pulling the photograph from his pocket, she stared at it, her brow furrowing as she took it in. That's you, she said slowly. And you, Benjamin said softly. Lauren shook her head, her expression clouded with confusion. No, that can't be me. I've never... You don't remember, Benjamin interrupted gently. But it's you. This was taken years ago. Before you lost your memory. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the photograph. How do you know that? Because I was there, Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. I was part of your life. He stopped himself, realizing it was too much. Too soon. We were close. Lauren stared at him, her expression unreadable. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you deserve to know the truth, Benjamin said simply. About who you are. About everything you've forgotten. Lauren's grip on the photograph tightened, and for a moment, Benjamin thought she might walk away, but then she looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. You don't have to do it alone, Benjamin said softly. I'll be here, every step of the way. Lauren said nothing, but the faintest flicker of trust passed across her face. Later that night, as Lauren walked home, her mind raced with questions. The photograph had shaken her to her core. The image of her younger self, so carefree and happy, felt like a stranger staring back at her. At her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook where she had been recording her memories. Tonight, she added a new entry, a photograph of me, a man who says he knows me. Who was I before? As she closed the notebook, Lauren felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Benjamin stared out at the city lights, the photograph resting on the table beside him. For the first time, he felt like he was making progress. Lauren was starting to trust him, starting to open the door to a past she had spent years avoiding. But he knew the road ahead would only get harder. the secrets he had uncovered, the pain they both carried. It was all building toward a confrontation he wasn't sure either of them was ready for. Benjamin sat at his desk, the photograph of him and Jessica resting beside his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he reviewed the detailed reports David had compiled about the accident that had changed everything. There were still too many gaps in the story, but one thing was clear. Lauren's survival had been a miracle. The Jacobs family had mentioned that she'd been found near a wooded area outside Boston, disoriented and injured. No police reports, no formal investigation, just a small hospital admission record that described her as Jane Doe until the Jacobs gave her a name. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. The thought of Jessica, of Lauren, wandering alone and terrified after escaping Gregory's scheme filled him with a burning resolve. Someone had to know more about that night, and he was determined to find out who, later that afternoon. Benjamin met with David in the sleek conference room of his corporate office. David placed a new stack of documents on the table. "I've dug up everything I could about the accident," David began. "It's not much, but there's a new lead. A retired paramedic named Carl Reynolds was the first person to respond to the scene. He doesn't live far from here." Benjamin's eyes narrowed with determination. "Set up a meeting. I want to hear what he remembers." That evening, Benjamin drove to a quiet suburb outside the city. Carl's house was modest but well kept, with a small porch illuminated by the warm glow of a single light bulb. When Carl answered the door, he looked every bit the part of a retired first responder, grizzled but kind, with eyes that spoke of years of experience. "You're Mr. Carter?" Carl asked, his voice gruff but polite. Benjamin nodded. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know it's been a long time. But I need to know what you remember about the accident involving a young woman near Boston." Carl gestured for Benjamin to come in, leading him to a small living room where stacks of old newspapers and books lined the shelves. "I remember that night clear as day," Carl said, settling into an armchair. "It was late, raining hard. I got a call about a woman found near the highway, barely conscious. When I got there, she was a mess. Cuts, bruises, clothes torn. She looked like she'd been running from something." Benjamin leaned forward, hanging on Carl's every word. "Did she say anything? Anything at all?" Carl shook his head. "Not much. She was in shock, mumbling about someone chasing her, kept saying she had to keep running, that she couldn't stop. It was like she thought whoever was after her was still there." Benjamin's jaw tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Gregory's betrayal had caused this fear, this suffering. "Did she ever mention a name?" Benjamin pressed. "No," Carl said, shaking his head. "She didn't remember anything about herself. When we got her to the hospital, they said she had amnesia. Must have hit her head during the chase." Benjamin exhaled slowly, trying to rein in his emotions. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual about the scene or the circumstances?" Carl frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. "There was something strange. A car was parked a ways down the road, hidden in the trees. It was abandoned when I got there, but it didn't look like an accident. It looked like someone had left it there on purpose." Benjamin's heart sank. Gregory's involvement was becoming clearer by the minute. "Did the police ever investigate the car?" Benjamin asked. Carl let out a bitter laugh. "They barely showed up. It was a quiet area. Things like that didn't get much attention. By the time they came around, the car was gone. No one claimed it, and no one followed up." Benjamin sat back, the weight of the information settling over him. Lauren had been failed at every turn. By the authorities, by Gregory, and even by him, though he hadn't known it at the time. "Thank you, Carl," Benjamin said, rising to his feet. "You've been more helpful than you know." As he drove back to the city, Benjamin's mind raced with possibilities. He couldn't undo the pain Lauren had endured, but he could make sure she never had to live in fear again. The next day, Benjamin met with David once more, sharing the details of his conversation with Carl. "Find out everything you can about that abandoned car," he instructed. "Check any records from the area and see if Gregory's name comes up. I want to know how deep this goes." Meanwhile, Lauren was beginning to feel the weight of her resurfacing memories. At work, she found herself distracted, her mind replaying flashes of moments she couldn't fully grasp. A man's voice calling her name, The sound of footsteps chasing her, the cold sting of rain against her skin. During a break, she stepped outside to clear her head. The crisp evening air did little to calm her racing thoughts. She closed her eyes, willing the fragments to make sense, but they remained elusive, just out of reach. Back inside, Lauren found herself drawn to Benjamin's table. He was there again, as he had been almost every night, his presence a strange source of both comfort and confusion. "Are you all right?" he asked softly when she approached. Lauren hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know, things have been strange lately. I keep remembering bits and pieces, but they don't make sense." Benjamin's gaze was steady, his voice gentle. "Maybe they're starting to come together for a reason." Lauren met his eyes, searching for answers she wasn't sure he could give. "Do you really think it's worth digging up the past?" "I do," Benjamin said without hesitation. "Sometimes the only way to move forward is to face what's behind us." Lauren nodded slowly, his words resonating in a way she didn't fully understand. For the first time, she felt a flicker of courage, a willingness to confront the unknown. As she walked away, Benjamin's resolve hardened. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and he was closer than ever to uncovering the full truth. But he knew that with each revelation, the stakes would only get higher. Lauren sat at the small table in her apartment, her fingers tracing the edges of the photograph Benjamin had shown her, the smiling woman in the picture, with her carefree expression and sparkling eyes. Felt both familiar and alien. It was as though she were looking at a stranger she was supposed to know. The notebook lay open in front of her, its pages filled with fragmented memories and hastily scribbled questions. She added another entry. "Who took this photo? Why does he know me? Why can't I remember?" Lauren leaned back in her chair, letting out a frustrated sigh. Her life had always been simple. Routine shifts at the restaurant, quiet evenings at home. But now, it felt as though the ground beneath her was shifting. Her thoughts turned to Benjamin. There was something about him, something that made her feel safe yet unsettled. He seemed to know so much about her, yet he withheld as much as he revealed. The way he looked at her, with a mixture of hope and sorrow, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time, Lauren allowed herself to wonder, what if he's telling the truth? The next evening at Carter's Grill, Lauren felt Benjamin's presence before she saw him. It had become a familiar routine. He would arrive just after the dinner rush, always sitting at the same table. Tonight was no different. She approached him with a cautious smile, her nerves hidden behind her professional demeanor. "Good evening." "Mr. Carter, your usual?" Benjamin returned her smile, though there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "Actually, I think I'll try the mushroom risotto tonight. You spoke so highly of it." Lauren blinked, caught off guard by his choice. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "I'll put in the order," as she walked away. She couldn't help but feel that Benjamin's request was more than a simple change of taste. It felt like a subtle acknowledgement of their shared conversations, a small connection that was beginning to bridge the gap between them. When she returned with his dish, Benjamin gestured for her to sit. "If you have a moment," he said, his tone inviting but not insistent. Lauren hesitated, then slid into the seat across from him. She folded her hands in her lap, her eyes meeting his. "You're very persistent, you know that." Benjamin chuckled softly. "I like to think of it as being patient." Lauren shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Why are you doing this? Why do you keep coming back here?" Benjamin's expression grew serious. "Because I think you deserve answers. About who you are, about your past, and I want to help you find them." Lauren's smile faded, her gaze dropping to the table. "What if I don't want to know? What if it's better this way? Do you really believe that?" Benjamin asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but I'm scared of what I might find." Benjamin reached across the table, his hand resting near hers without touching it. "I understand, but you're not alone in this. Whatever you find, I'll be here." Lauren looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. She found none. Before she could respond, the restaurant manager called her name, and Lauren excused herself. As she returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that Benjamin's words had planted a seed of courage in her heart. Later that night, Lauren sat on her bed, the photograph still clutched in her hand. She closed her eyes, willing herself to remember. For weeks, Her memories had been coming in fragments, flashes of moments that felt both vivid and distant. But now, she pushed harder, forcing herself to confront the images that flickered in her mind. She saw a fountain, the sound of laughter ringing in her ears, a hand reaching for hers, the faint scent of cologne. Lauren's eyes flew open, her heart pounding. The flashes were stronger now, more insistent. She grabbed her notebook and wrote furiously. The fountain, his hand, the laughter. Across town, Benjamin sat in his penthouse, staring at the same photograph. He had spent the evening reviewing the details David had uncovered about Gregory's involvement in Jessica's disappearance. The abandoned car, the lack of police investigation. It all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. Gregory's betrayal still stung, but Benjamin couldn't afford to dwell on it. His focus was on Lauren, on helping her reclaim the life she had lost. The next day, Benjamin decided to visit Carter's Grill earlier than usual. When he arrived, the restaurant was quieter than usual, the pre-dinner lull creating a calm atmosphere. Lauren was wiping down tables, her movements methodical and deliberate. When she saw him, her expression softened. "You're early today," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Benjamin smiled. "I couldn't wait." Lauren rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. "What can I get for you? How about some time to talk?" he suggested, his tone light but sincere. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "Let me finish up here, and we'll see." As she walked away, Benjamin felt a flicker of hope. The walls Lauren had built around herself were beginning to crack, and he was determined to help her find the strength to tear them down completely. That evening, as Lauren closed the restaurant, she found herself lingering near Benjamin's table. He looked up at her with that same patient, understanding smile that both frustrated and comforted her. "Can I show you something?" Benjamin asked. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. Benjamin pulled out a small journal, its pages filled with notes and memories from his time with Jessica. He opened it to a page where a pressed flower lay between the sheets. "This was hers," he said softly. "She used to press flowers from every place we visited. This one was from the day we took that photo by the fountain." Lauren stared at the flower, her throat tightening. Something about it stirred an ache deep within her, a longing she couldn't name. For the first time, she let herself believe that Benjamin's words might be true. Benjamin Carter hadn't seen Gregory since their confrontation days earlier, but he could feel the man's shadow lingering over his every move. Gregory might have retreated in the moment, but Benjamin knew his former friend well enough to understand that he wouldn't stay quiet for long. That evening, as Benjamin prepared for his usual visit to Carter's Grill, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. Gregory's name flashed in bold letters. For a moment, Benjamin debated ignoring the call, but curiosity and caution got the better of him. He swiped to answer, his voice cold. "What do you want?" "Ben," Gregory said, his tone too calm, too rehearsed. "We need to talk. There's a lot we didn't finish last time." "There's nothing more to say," Benjamin replied sharply. "You admitted to everything. What could you possibly have left to explain?" Gregory let out a hollow laugh. "You think this is over? You're deluding yourself. You're digging into things better left buried, and it's going to backfire. Is that a threat?" Benjamin asked, his grip tightening on the phone. "It's a warning," Gregory said. "You've got everything you could ever want, Ben. Let this go before you lose it all." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "The only thing I want is the truth, and no matter what you do, I'm going to find it." Gregory's voice turned icy. "You're making a mistake." Before Benjamin could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, a cold anger simmering in his chest. Gregory's words only confirmed what Benjamin had suspected. The man was planning something, and it wouldn't be subtle. At Carter's Grill, Lauren was already feeling uneasy before Benjamin arrived. The fragments of memory she'd been experiencing had grown more vivid, but with them came an overwhelming sense of fear. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, that the safety she'd taken for granted was slipping away. When Benjamin walked through the door, she felt a small wave of relief. His presence, though complicated, had become a strange source of comfort in the chaos her mind had become. "You're late," she said with a faint smile as he took his usual seat. "Had an unexpected call," Benjamin replied, his tone more serious than usual. Lauren tilted her head, studying him. "Something wrong?" "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, forcing a reassuring smile. "How are you?" Lauren hesitated, then shrugged. "I've been remembering more, little things. Mostly. But it's like the more I remember, the more I feel like something's missing." Benjamin nodded, his gaze steady. "That's a good sign. It means you're getting closer to the truth, or farther from it," Lauren said with a sigh. Before Benjamin could respond, the restaurant manager approached. "Manager?" His expression apologetic. "Lauren, can I see you for a moment?" She excused herself, leaving Benjamin to his thoughts as he watched her walk away. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. "You've been warned. Leave it alone. No name, no number." But Benjamin didn't need one. Gregory's fingerprints were all over it. When Lauren returned, she noticed the tension in Benjamin's expression. "Everything okay?" "Yes," he said quickly, tucking his phone into his pocket. "But I think we should talk somewhere private. Are you free after your shift?" Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. What's this about?" "I'll explain later," Benjamin said. "Just trust me." That night, after the restaurant closed, Benjamin waited for Lauren outside. They walked together in silence, the cool evening air wrapping around them. When they reached a quiet park, Benjamin finally spoke. "There's something you need to know," he began, his voice steady. "About why I've been so insistent on helping you." Lauren stopped, her eyes searching his face. "Go on." Benjamin took a deep breath. "I haven't told you everything. About your past. About why I recognize you." Lauren's heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Then tell me now." "You weren't just anyone to me," Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were everything. The woman in the photograph. The woman I've been looking for all these years. That was you, Lauren. You're Jessica." Lauren's breath caught, her mind reeling. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. The photograph, the fragments of memory, the undeniable connection she felt with Benjamin. It all pointed to one truth. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't have to say anything," Benjamin said gently. "I just needed you to know." Before either of them could say more, a figure emerged from the shadows. Lauren's breath hitched as Gregory stepped into the dim light, his expression unreadable. "Well, isn't this touching?" Gregory said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The two of you, reconnecting after all these years. What are you doing here?" Benjamin demanded, stepping protectively in front of Lauren. "I'm here to stop you from making a mistake," Gregory said, his gaze shifting to Lauren. "He's not telling you the whole story, you know." Lauren frowned, her confusion deepening. "What are you talking about?" "Ask him what happened that night," Gregory said, his tone taunting. "Ask him why you ended up running for your life." "Don't listen to him," Benjamin said, his voice firm. "He's trying to manipulate you." Lauren looked between the two men, her heart pounding. "I don't know who to believe," Gregory smirked. "Think about it, Lauren. Do you really think he's the hero in all of this? Or is there more to the story than he's letting on?" Benjamin clenched his fists, his anger barely contained. "Enough, Gregory. You've done enough damage, leave her alone." Gregory held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." As he disappeared into the shadows, Lauren felt a wave of doubt crash over her. The tension between the two men, the cryptic warnings. It all left her feeling more lost than ever. Lauren sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the notebook in front of her. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a fragmented film. Benjamin's confession, Gregory's sudden appearance, the cryptic warnings. It was too much to process, and yet she couldn't stop trying to piece it all together. The name Jessica felt foreign and familiar all at once. It lingered on her tongue like a half-forgotten melody, stirring emotions she couldn't place. She flipped through the notebook, her entries from the past weeks staring back at her. The flashes of memory, the photograph, the details Benjamin had shared. They were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. What if Gregory is right? What if Benjamin isn't telling me everything? The thought sent a chill down her spine, but she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. Later that evening, Lauren arrived at Carter's Grill with a heaviness in her chest. Benjamin was already there, sitting at his usual table when their eyes met. She saw a mixture of relief and apprehension in his gaze. "Lauren," he said softly as she approached. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. Benjamin nodded, his expression serious. "Not here. Let's go somewhere quiet." They walked together in silence, the hum of the city fading as they reached a secluded corner of Central Park. Lauren stopped beneath a towering oak tree, crossing her arms as she turned to face him. "I need the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "All of it. No more half-answers, no more secrets." Benjamin met her gaze, his shoulders sagging slightly as if under the weight of what he was about to reveal. "You deserve the truth," he said, "but it won't be easy to hear." Lauren braced herself. "I can handle it." Benjamin took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. 18 years ago, you were Jessica Harper. We were in love. I was going to propose to you. But that night, everything went wrong. Lauren's heart pounded, but she stayed silent, urging him to continue. "My best friend, Gregory, betrayed me," Benjamin said, his voice laced with anger and regret. "He was jealous of my life, of you. He orchestrated your disappearance. He wanted to scare you, make you leave me. But things spiraled out of control. You ran, and during the chaos, you were hurt." Lauren's breath caught. "The accident," she whispered. Benjamin nodded. "You lost your memory. The family in Boston took you in and gave you a new life. All those years, I searched for you. But I never knew what had happened. Not until now." Lauren stared at him, her mind racing to process his words. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "I didn't want to overwhelm you," Benjamin admitted. "And I didn't know how much you could handle. I was afraid of losing you again." Lauren took a step back, her emotions swirling in a storm of confusion and anger. "And Gregory, why is he still here? Why does he think he can manipulate me?" "Because he's desperate," Benjamin said. "He knows the truth is coming out, and he's trying to twist it to save himself. But you can't trust him, Lauren. He's the reason you've been living this way." Lauren looked away, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts. She wanted to believe Benjamin, but Gregory's words still lingered, planting seeds of doubt, as if summoned by her thoughts. Gregory appeared at the edge of the park, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the city lights. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Gregory said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Lauren turned to face him, her expression hardening. "What do you want?" "I want you to know the full story," Gregory said, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at Benjamin. "He's not as innocent as he wants you to believe." Benjamin stepped forward, his anger barely contained. "Don't listen to him, Lauren. He's lying," Gregory smirked. Tell her, Ben. Tell her about the night you decided to confront me. Tell her how you ignored every warning sign, how your stubbornness led her to that accident in the first place." Lauren's eyes widened as she turned to Benjamin. "What is he talking about?" Benjamin hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice low. "I trusted Gregory when I shouldn't have. I confronted him that night, and things escalated. But I never meant for you to get hurt." Gregory laughed bitterly. "There it is, the great Benjamin Carter, admitting he's not the hero he pretends to be." Lauren felt the ground shift beneath her. The tension between the two men was suffocating, and the weight of their words pressed down on her. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I need time to think." She turned and walked away, leaving both men behind. Benjamin watched her go, his heart breaking with every step she took. Gregory, on the other hand, wore a smug expression, as if he had won some unspoken battle. "You can't save her, Ben," Gregory said. "She'll never trust you now." Benjamin turned to him, his eyes blazing. "You're wrong. She'll see through your lies. And when she does, you'll have nothing left." Gregory smirked. "We'll see." As Benjamin walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, while necessary, had only complicated things further. Lauren needed time, but time was a luxury they might not have. Back at her apartment, Lauren sat in silence, her thoughts a tangled mess. She stared at the photograph Benjamin had given her, her mind replaying the night's events. For the first time, she wasn't sure who to believe. Lauren sat in the dim light of her apartment, the city outside buzzing with its usual chaos. Inside, her world was silent. Except for the storm raging in her mind, the truth, or at least pieces of it, was beginning to surface, and she didn't know how to reconcile the conflicting stories. She stared at the photograph Benjamin had given her, her fingers tracing the edges. The smiling woman in the picture felt like a stranger, yet she couldn't deny the pull of familiarity. Her notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with fragmented memories and scribbled questions. She picked up her pen and added another entry. Gregory says Benjamin is hiding something. Benjamin says Gregory is lying. Who am I supposed to trust? Lauren leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The flashes of memory had been coming more frequently, but they were still fragmented, like shards of a broken mirror. She focused on the sensations she could remember: the sound of laughter, the warmth of someone's hand in hers, the faint scent of cologne. And then, like a door creaking open, more images began to surface. She saw a fountain bathed in soft light, the sound of water mingling with quiet laughter. She saw herself sitting across from Benjamin, his hand reaching for hers. And then, in stark contrast, she saw darkness, the roar of an engine, the blinding glare of headlights, the sensation of falling. Lauren's eyes flew open, her heart racing. The memories were disjointed, but they were becoming clearer. She grabbed her pen again, writing furiously. The fountain, laughter, darkness, falling. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still so many gaps, and those gaps were filled with fear. The next day at Carter's Grill, Lauren arrived for her shift, feeling raw and vulnerable. Benjamin wasn't there yet, and she found herself both relieved and disappointed. His presence had become a strange comfort, but after last night's confrontation, she wasn't sure if she could face him. When he did arrive, he was quieter than usual, his usual warmth tinged with hesitation. He watched her from his usual table, his gaze steady but cautious. Lauren approached him during a lull in the dinner rush, her steps slow and deliberate. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Benjamin nodded, standing. "Not here. Let's go somewhere private." They walked in silence to the nearby park, the cool evening air wrapping around them. Lauren stopped beneath the same oak tree where they had spoken the night before, her arms crossed as she turned to face him. "I remembered something," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Benjamin's expression softened. "What did you remember?" "There was a fountain," Lauren said, her gaze distant as she tried to piece the memory together. "We were sitting together. You reached for my hand. I think I was happy." Benjamin smiled, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. "That was the night I planned to propose to you. The night everything changed." Lauren nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "I also remembered something else. Darkness. Headlights. Falling, it felt. Terrifying." Benjamin's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "That was the night Gregory's plan went wrong. You were running, trying to get away. The accident." He trailed off, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have protected you." Lauren shook her head, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "I don't know what to believe. Gregory says you're not telling me the whole truth, that you were part of the reason I was running." "I wasn't perfect," Benjamin admitted, his voice raw. "I made mistakes. I trusted Gregory when I shouldn't have, but I never wanted you to be hurt. Everything I've done since that night has been to find you, to make things right." Lauren looked away, her mind racing. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to figure this out." Benjamin nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Take all the time you need, but just know, I'll be here when you're ready." As Lauren walked away, her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to believe Benjamin, but Gregory's words still lingered in her mind, sowing seeds of doubt. Later that night, as she sat in her apartment, the flashes of memory came again. This time, they were stronger, more vivid. She saw herself running through the rain, the sound of her own breath loud in her ears. She saw headlights cutting through the darkness, the sharp screech of tires. And then, she saw him, Benjamin, standing beneath a street lamp, his face etched with worry. Lauren gasped, her eyes flying open. The memories were still fragmented, but they were becoming clearer. She grabbed her notebook, writing furiously, running through the rain, headlights, Benjamin under a street lamp. The memories felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. But there were still so many unanswered questions. Who had been chasing her? Why had she been running? Across town, Benjamin sat in his penthouse, staring at the photograph of him and Jessica. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Lauren, of the truth he had shared, and the doubts she still carried. Meanwhile, Gregory sat in his own office, his expression smug as he reviewed the text messages he had sent Lauren earlier that day. "Benjamin isn't telling you everything. Meet me, and I'll give you the full story." Gregory knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he wasn't ready to lose if Benjamin thought he could simply erase him from Lauren's life. He was sorely mistaken. As Lauren drifted to sleep that night, her dreams were filled with flashes of the past, of laughter, of love, and of fear. And somewhere in the darkness, a voice whispered her name. Lauren woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand, groggy and disoriented. She reached for it, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. The name on the screen sent a jolt through her. Unknown number. With hesitant fingers, she swiped to answer. "Hello? Lauren," a voice said, calm but tinged with urgency. "It's Gregory, we need to talk." She sat up, her heart racing. "Why are you calling me?" "Because there are things you need to know. Things Benjamin hasn't told you," Gregory replied. "I can explain everything, but it has to be in person. Can you meet me?" Lauren hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I was there," Gregory said firmly. "I know what happened that night. If you want the truth, meet me at the coffee shop on 8th Avenue in an hour." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Lauren stared at her phone, uncertainty twisting her stomach into knots. She didn't know what to believe, but the lure of answers was too strong to ignore. An hour later, Lauren found herself sitting across from Gregory in a dimly lit coffee shop. He looked calm, composed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming," Gregory began, his voice smooth. "I know this is confusing for you, but I promise you'll leave here with clarity." Lauren crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "I'm here to listen, not to be manipulated. Start talking." Gregory smirked faintly. "Fair enough. I'll get straight to the point. Benjamin has painted himself as the hero in all of this, hasn't he? The man who's spent years searching for you, who's only ever wanted to protect you." Lauren frowned. "Isn't that the truth?" Gregory leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Partially. What he hasn't told you is that he was the reason you were in danger that night. He pushed too hard, confronted me when he shouldn't have, and escalated everything. If he had just listened to me, none of this would have happened." Lauren's stomach churned as Gregory's words sank in. "So, you're saying this is all his fault?" "Not entirely," Gregory admitted, his tone calculated. "I made mistakes. I shouldn't have interfered in your relationship, but Benjamin, he was reckless. He put you in harm's way, and now he's trying to sweep that part of the story under the rug." Lauren's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in ways that only made her more uncertain. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want you to see the full picture," Gregory said. "You deserve to know the truth. About him, about me, about everything." Lauren sat back, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Gregory reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "This is from that night," he said, sliding it across the table. Lauren unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a crumpled note, the edges worn, but the words were clear. "Jessica, meet me at the fountain. It's important. Trust me." She stared at the note, her heart pounding. "What is this supposed to prove?" "That Benjamin knew what was happening," Gregory said. "He knew I was involved, and instead of protecting you, he pushed you into danger. He didn't tell you that, did he?" Lauren's grip on the note tightened. "And what about you, Gregory? You're not exactly innocent in all this." Gregory's expression hardened. "I never claimed to be, but the difference between me and Benjamin is that I'm willing to admit my mistakes. He's not." Lauren stood abruptly, shoving the note into her pocket. "I need time to think about this." "Take all the time you need," Gregory said smoothly. "But remember, the truth doesn't change, no matter how much Benjamin tries to spin it." As Lauren walked out of the coffee shop, her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. Gregory's words echoed in her ears, but so did Benjamin's. She didn't know who to believe, and the weight of the decision felt unbearable. That evening, She found herself standing outside Benjamin's penthouse, the note clutched in her hand. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the doorbell. Before she could press it, the door opened, and Benjamin stood there, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Lauren," he said softly. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, her movements tense. "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "All of it." Benjamin led her to the living room, where she sat on the edge of the couch, the note still clutched in her hand. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cautious. She handed him the note, watching his reaction closely. Benjamin's eyes darkened as he read it, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "Gregory gave it to me," Lauren said. "He says you knew what was happening that night, that you put me in danger." Benjamin looked up at her, his expression pained. "Lauren, I need you to listen to me. Gregory is twisting the truth. Yes, I wrote this note, but it wasn't because I knew he was planning anything. I wrote it because I was going to propose to you. I wanted it to be special." Lauren's chest tightened as she processed his words. "Then why does he say you escalated everything?" "Because I confronted him when I realized he was trying to manipulate you," Benjamin said. "I made mistakes, but I swear to you, I never wanted you to be hurt. Everything I've done since that night has been to make things right." Lauren's eyes filled with tears as she searched his face for any sign of deceit. "I don't know what to believe," she whispered. Benjamin reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "Believe what's in your heart," he said softly, "and know that I will never stop fighting for you." Lauren looked at him, her emotions swirling. The choice before her felt impossible, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. Lauren walked aimlessly through the city streets, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the decision before her. The conflicting stories from Benjamin and Gregory swirled in her mind, each tugging at her in different directions. She didn't know who to trust, and the uncertainty was suffocating. Without realizing it, her steps carried her to Central Park. The familiar oak tree stood tall in the moonlight, its branches stretching wide as though offering her solace. She sat on the bench beneath it, staring up at the leaves that rustled softly in the breeze. This tree had become a quiet refuge in recent weeks, a place where she could think, away from the noise and chaos of the city. But tonight, the memories it stirred within her felt sharper, more urgent. Closing her eyes, Lauren focused on the flashes of memory that had been haunting her. The fountain, the laughter, the headlights, Benjamin's face illuminated by a street lamp, and then, as if a dam had burst, the fragments came together. She saw herself running through the rain, her dress clinging to her as she gasped for breath. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, and she glanced back, her heart pounding with terror. A car screeched to a halt in front of her, its headlights blinding. She tripped, the ground rushing up to meet her as she fell. But then, another memory surfaced, one that made her breath catch. She saw Benjamin standing beneath the street lamp, his face etched with worry. He called her name, his voice cutting through the chaos. He had been there, reaching for her. Trying to protect her, Lauren opened her eyes, her heart racing. The clarity of the memory left her trembling. Benjamin had been there, but not as Gregory had suggested. He hadn't been the cause of her fear. He had been her safe haven. The realization sent a surge of emotion through her. She needed to talk to him, to tell him what she had remembered. As she stood, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw another message from Gregory. "Meet me tomorrow. I'll show you proof of what Benjamin's hiding." Lauren stared at the message, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let Gregory manipulate her anymore. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and she wouldn't let his lies cloud her judgment. The next evening, Lauren walked into Carter's grill, her heart pounding. Benjamin was already there, seated at his usual table. When he saw her, he stood, his expression filled with both hope and apprehension. "Lauren," he began, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. "But not here." Benjamin nodded, following her as she led him outside. They walked together to the oak tree, the moonlight casting soft shadows over their faces. Lauren turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I remembered something," she said. Benjamin's breath caught. "What did you remember?" "I remembered you," Lauren said, her voice trembling. "That night, I was running. I was terrified. But you were there. You were trying to help me." Relief washed over Benjamin's face, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've waited so long for you to remember," he said softly. Lauren took a deep breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "But I also remembered how scared I was, Gregory. He was chasing me, wasn't he?" Benjamin nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes. He wanted to force you to leave, to make you think you had no choice but to run. He thought it was the only way to take you away from me." Lauren's voice broke as she spoke. "And the accident, it wasn't your fault." "No," Benjamin said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But I blame myself every day for not being able to stop it. I should have protected you, Jessica. I should have kept you safe." Lauren stepped closer, her gaze softening. "You did everything you could. I see that now." Benjamin's eyes searched hers, hope mingled with vulnerability. "Do you really believe that?" Lauren nodded, her voice steady. "I do, and I know the truth now. Gregory was the one who caused all of this. He's been trying to manipulate me, but I won't let him anymore." Benjamin reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. You always have been." For a moment, they stood in silence beneath the oak tree, the weight of the past slowly lifting as they faced the present together. But Lauren knew their journey wasn't over yet. "I need to confront Gregory," she said. "I need to hear him admit the truth, face to face." Benjamin's grip on her hand tightened. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you, every step of the way." Lauren looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name just yet. "Thank you," she said simply, as they left the park. The oak tree stood as a silent witness to their renewed bond, its branches stretching toward the stars as if to mark the beginning of a new chapter. The following morning, Lauren woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her memories, though incomplete, were no longer just fragments. They were pieces of a truth she was ready to face head-on. Gregory's manipulation had controlled her long enough, and it was time to put an end to it. She sent him a text. "We need to meet. Today. Noon at the coffee shop." Gregory replied almost immediately. "I'll be there." Lauren paced her apartment, her thoughts racing as she prepared for the confrontation. She had spent the night replaying every interaction she'd had with Gregory, every word he'd said now. With her memories aligning and Benjamin's unwavering support, she could finally see through his lies. Shortly before noon, Benjamin arrived at her apartment. His presence was a quiet reassurance, his calm demeanor helping to steady her nerves. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as they walked toward the coffee shop. Lauren nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "I need to do this. I need to hear him admit the truth." Benjamin placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Just remember, you're not alone." When they entered the coffee shop, Gregory was already there, seated at a corner table with a smug expression that made Lauren's stomach churn. He stood as they approached, his gaze flickering briefly to Benjamin before settling on Lauren. "Well, this is unexpected," Gregory said, his tone dripping with mock surprise. "I didn't realize we were making this a group meeting." Lauren ignored his attempt at humor, her voice steady as she spoke. "I want the truth, Gregory. No more lies, no more manipulation. Tell me what really happened that night." Gregory's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, his smirk returning. "I've already told you the truth. It's Benjamin who's been keeping secrets from you." "That's enough," Benjamin said, his voice firm. "She remembers. Gregory, she remembers you chasing her, driving her to run, causing the accident. Stop trying to twist this into something it's not." Gregory laughed bitterly. "Of course, she remembers. You've had weeks to fill her head with your version of events." Lauren stepped forward, her eyes blazing with anger. "This isn't his version, Gregory, it's mine. I remember running from you. I remember the fear, the headlights, the fall, and I remember Benjamin trying to help me. You can't manipulate me anymore." Gregory's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker, desperation. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "Everything I did for us. For you, Lauren. Benjamin didn't deserve you. He never did. He was always so perfect, so untouchable. I just wanted to show you there was another way." Lauren's stomach turned at his words. You call chasing me through the rain and forcing me into an accident, another way. You destroyed my life, Gregory. You took everything from me. Gregory's desperation morphed into anger. And what about Benjamin? He's not innocent in all of this. He pushed me, Lauren. He forced my hand. Don't try to deflect, Benjamin said sharply. This isn't about me. This is about what you did to her. Take responsibility for your actions. Gregory's fists clenched at his sides, his composure unraveling. You always thought you were better than me, he spat. But you're just as flawed as I am. The difference is, I'm willing to admit it. Lauren's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Admitting your flaws doesn't erase what you did, Gregory. You stole my life, my memories, and you left me to pick up the pieces. You don't get to justify that. Gregory's shoulders slumped, his anger giving way to defeat. For a moment, he looked as though he might say something more, but then he simply turned and walked away, leaving Lauren and Benjamin standing in stunned silence. As the door to the coffee shop swung shut behind him, Lauren let out a shaky breath, the weight of the confrontation crashing down on her. Benjamin reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. You did it, he said softly. You faced him. Lauren nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It's over, she whispered. But as they walked out into the sunlight, she knew it wasn't truly over. The confrontation had brought her closure, but it hadn't erased the pain or the memories of everything she had lost. That night, Lauren sat beneath the oak tree in Central Park. The photograph of her and Benjamin resting in her lap, she traced the edges of the picture, her heart heavy with emotion. Benjamin joined her, his presence quiet and steady. How are you feeling? He asked. Relieved, she said after a moment, but also lost. I have my memories back, but I don't know what to do with them. Benjamin's gaze was tender as he spoke. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Take your time and remember, you're not alone. Lauren looked at him, a small smile breaking through her tears. Thank you, Benjamin, for everything. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. We've come this far together. I'm not going anywhere. As they sat beneath the oak tree, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by the faint glow of hope. The days after Gregory's departure felt like a breath of fresh air for Lauren. Though the weight of the confrontation lingered, the truth had surfaced, and with it came a sense of liberation. But it also left her with questions about the person she had become and the life she wanted to create moving forward. Benjamin was a steady presence during this time. He didn't pressure her or demand anything. Instead, he offered his quiet support, always ready to listen and share pieces of their past when she was ready. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, Lauren stopped under the oak tree that had become a silent witness to so much of their journey. She looked up at its branches, silhouetted against the soft glow of the city lights. This tree, she said, her voice tinged with wonder. It feels like a part of my story now. It's been here through everything. Strong, unmoving. While my life felt like it was falling apart, this stayed the same. Benjamin watched her, his eyes warm. It's a good metaphor, he said, for resilience, for growth, and maybe even for us. Lauren turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. I guess so, she admitted. You've been like that for me, you know. Steady, always there. Benjamin stepped closer, taking her hand in his. I'll always be here for you, Jessica, or Lauren, whatever name you choose. It doesn't matter to me. You're still the same incredible woman I fell in love with. Her breath caught at his words, the sincerity in his voice stirring something deep within her. For so long, she had been afraid of embracing her past, of acknowledging the person she had been. But now, standing here with Benjamin, she felt ready to bridge the gap between who she was and who she wanted to become. I think I'm ready, she said softly. Ready to face my past, to own it, but also to build something new, something that's mine. Benjamin smiled, his expression full of pride and love. Whatever path you choose, I'll walk it with you. Lauren squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with gratitude and hope. In the following weeks, Lauren began taking steps to reclaim her identity and rebuild her life. Her first visit was to the Jacobs family in Boston. Standing at the doorstep of the modest home where she had spent so many years, she felt a rush of gratitude for the people who had taken her in when she had nothing. Mrs. Jacobs pulled her into a warm embrace, her eyes glistening with tears. Lauren, Or should I say Jessica? It doesn't matter. We're just so happy to see you. They spent hours talking. Sharing stories and memories, Lauren thanked them for the love and care they had given her, and they, in turn, expressed their joy at seeing her begin to piece together her life. From there, Lauren began to revisit places tied to her past. She went to the fountain where Benjamin had planned to propose, the park bench where they had shared countless conversations, and even the small bookstore where they used to browse together. Each visit brought a mix of emotions: pain, joy, and a sense of closure. But Lauren didn't stop there. She also focused on creating a future she could be proud of. She enrolled in a design course. Pursuing her long-hidden passion for fashion and creativity, she reconnected with old friends and began forging new relationships, slowly building a life that felt authentic to her. Benjamin was by her side every step of the way, offering encouragement and celebrating her victories, no matter how small. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. The love they had once shared rekindled and deepened by everything they had endured together. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of Benjamin's penthouse, the city lights stretching out before them, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his tone soft but serious. Lauren raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Benjamin reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, the same one he had planned to give her all those years ago. Lauren's breath hitched as she stared at the ring, her emotions overwhelming her. "Jessica, Lauren," Benjamin began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've loved you for as long as I can remember, and even when I thought I'd lost you, that love never went away. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her heart nearly bursting with love and gratitude. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. 1,000 times yes. Benjamin slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steadied despite the emotion in his eyes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the moment sinking in, before Lauren leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Their wedding was held beneath the oak tree in Central Park, a small and intimate ceremony filled with love and warmth. Friends, family, and even the Jacobs were there, their smiles lighting up the day as Lauren and Benjamin exchanged vows. The past finally felt like a distant memory, no longer a source of pain, but a testament to their resilience and love. After the ceremony, Lauren stood beneath the oak tree, her gaze drifting upward. Benjamin joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Do you think this tree will remember us?" she asked playfully. Benjamin chuckled. "If it does, I hope it remembers how far we've come." Lauren smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "We've come a long way," she said softly, "and I'm ready for whatever comes next." As they walked hand in hand toward their future, the oak tree stood as a silent witness to their journey, a symbol of growth, resilience, and the enduring power of love.